basement flooding specifically?
So let me just tell you about what I do for the city, all right? So I work for the city of Providence, and I work for the mayor, Mayor Providence, and I'm his emergency manager. And so there's emergencies every day, right? The fire truck drives by, put out the fire, or the police car drives by to, go rescue somebody. That's not my emergencies. My emergencies are big emergencies. So things like flooding, hurricanes, blizzards, and probably a couple dozen other things. So my job in the city is to take all the different departments, so the police department, the fire department, public works department, planning and development, even some really departments you've never heard of, and get them all to work together during a storm or during an emergency. So it's a pretty unique mission that I have as an emergency manager to make sure everyone works together, either preparing for an emergency, responding to an emergency, or recovering from an emergency. There's this other thing called mitigation. Anybody want to take a stab at that one? What mitigation is?
Trying to prevent stuff like that from happening, or trying to prevent what it causes.
Right, exactly. So mitigation is so in the simplest terms, we're always concerned about life safety. So if you can save the life of somebody, you want to do that first. So if there's a hazard, you want to, and there's a hazard, like you live next to a big gas tank, right? You live next to a big gas tank down the port. Well, the easiest way to reduce injury to people or property is to remove it from the hazard, right? So, for instance, in the floods of a couple years ago in Cranston, all those houses flooded along the river. Well, just recently, it takes a long time, the federal government and the city purchased those houses from those owners, gave them money for that house, they moved somewhere else, away from the river, and then they turned that land, or that house, back into swamp. That's mitigation, right? They want to get the people out of the hazard, that way you reduce the risk. So that's kind of the four big things that we do. Prepare, respond, recover, and mitigate. So what's the hardest thing that I do? Of all those four things, what do you think is the hardest thing to do? Anyone? Who's Jiffy? Is it Jiffy? So, what's the hardest thing that I do?
Mitigation, probably, because you have to put,
It's hard, but that's not the hardest thing.
It's probably like grouping all the police and fire and one.
Sometimes it's hard, but they tend to listen when the chips are down. The hardest thing that I have. Yes, sir, Jiffy.
I think it's prevention.
Yeah, it's prevention and preparation. The hardest thing, my biggest challenge is trying to get people to take care of themselves, right? To prepare themselves and their family. So what I do is I hand out. Can you catch two? Because he only has one hand. So I try to get people to get prepared for themselves. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to get you guys to prepare, you and your family. Ready? I have more, don't worry. So this is just a little kit, right, that I buy and I hand out to residents to say, listen, I can't prepare you for everything, but I'm going to start you on the path of preparedness, right? So in here is what? Like essentials. So what's in there? Go ahead.
A mask, a whistle, a light stick, a water pouch, and an emergency blanket.
Yeah. So kind of the things that you need, at least initially, to survive on, right? So there's a mask to keep dust out of your mouth so you can breathe, right? Keep the body alive. There's a whistle for what reason?
Getting help.
Right, get help. We'll get somebody to, get attention. Light stick. Because when who has a cell phone? All right. Easy question. Who doesn't have a cell phone? Really? Wow. I congratulate you. So one of the hottest things that we do when the light goes out is try to charge that cell phone or that iPad or whatever you have. So that light stick is chemical, right? It's a chemical reaction. You break it and it lights up on its own. And then water, because sometimes you get thirsty and you have to put water into your body. And then the last one is an emergency blanket, keep warm. So those are kind of like the basic essentials to kind of keep you alive for a short period of time. Yes, sir. So the three basic things that I ask everyone to do in preparedness are on this side here. Get a kit. So you've already give you a starter kit, right? Get a kit. Make a plan. So you have to have a plan, right? You just can't do it on the fly, although most people do. But it's good to have a plan, right? Who knows all the phone numbers to all their family members without their cell phone? Yeah. Well, there you go. So if they're not on your cell phone, is it all in your head how to call somebody if you get stranded? Right, it's all good. All right. So this is the robot class. So you guys you're on it. And then the last one is keep informed. Is how I try to get information to the public, either by radio or by social media or TV or other ways we.
A brochure.
Or a brochure, right? Yep. And that's a good segue because I do have some brochures that we hand out.
What is the most common disaster that really is prone?
For Rhode Island?
Yeah, that we really have a lot.
So the big three we probably have about 22 or 25 kinds of hazards that we have in Rhode Island. But the top 3 or 4 are hurricanes, right? Because East Coast hurricanes, flooding. So flooding can come in a couple different ways. It can come as a result of a hurricane, which is a summer storm, or flooding from a winter storm, where it's not not freezing, or it can come from this thing called surge, where the water combined with the tide, combined with the wind, actually pushes water up on shore. That's flooding too. It can rain inland, so it can have a storm hundreds of miles from here and actually swell the rivers, and you get local flooding because the water goes out of the bank. So there's a lot of flooding is probably not only for New England but for the nation is probably the #1 hazard. I think more people die from flooding than die from anything else. But flooding comes in a lot of different ways.
What is like the average cost of restoring a basement from flooding?
Well, it all depends. So here's the thing about basements. So if you does everyone have a basement in their house? Anyone not have a basement? Everyone have a flat pad, right?
Yeah.
So it's all about the type of construction used to build the house. So if you have a basement, most of your utilities, right, your hot water heater, your furnace that heats your heat, what else is down there? Electrical panel, right, the breaker panel, it's all in the basement. So unique to Rhode Island, most houses have basements. So if you get 6 inches or 12 inches in your basement, is it a big deal? No, not really, because you can either pump it out, you can vacuum it out, you can scoop it out, you can bucket it out, you can get rid of the water, and really doesn't touch anything. So our problem in Rhode Island, especially for those people that live along the river, right, or live along, like adjacent to the coast, is if the water in the basement touches, first of all, if it touches the oil burner, that's a whole new burner because you can't really recover from that. The really dangerous thing, if it touches the electrical breaker panel, so if it touches the electrical breaker panel, you have a whole bunch of challenges. First of all, National Grid, who's the electrical utility provider, shuts the electricity up to the house automatically. And it doesn't come back on until what they call you dewater the house. You take the water out. So you dewater the house, get all the hot water out of the basement, you put a new service panel in. So an electrician has to do that, so you have to have a license to do it. And then, before National Grid comes back and puts the wire on your house, the city has to come back and approve that it's been done properly. And then, National Grid comes back and puts your power back on. So it depends how deep the water is in your basement. So a little bit of water, 6, 12 inches, not a problem. When it gets feet, when it's over the burner, that's one problem. But when it gets into that panel, electrical panel, you've hit a different kind of plateau when it comes to recovering, getting back in your house. It becomes much more difficult because you can't live in the house anymore. So you have no electricity, you can't have a refrigerator, you can't cook, you don't have a phone, so you actually have to leave the house, which is difficult. Yes, ma'am.
What kind of measures are being taken to avoid basement flooding?
Awareness. Do you know where you live? And have you checked the map to see if you're in the flood zone or the inundation zone? And so if you know that, then you can take precautions. So for instance, how do you protect your basement? Well, maybe you waterproof the outside because that's one way to do it. maybe you have sandbags and you're gonna, ever see in a disaster on TV, the blue tarps, the blue, right, everyone has a blue top on their roof or on their bulkhead. So some people in Rhode Island, they'll try to waterproof all the entry points for water with blue tarps and tar paper and duct tape and all those kinds of things. So, but there comes a point where there's not much you can do other than, moving out of your basement or changing the way your utilities are. One of those things that insurance companies generally don't do. So there's limited things you can do as a resident. For the most part, it's hard to do. Yes, ma'am.
So what's like the yearly percent chance that a flood will happen?
The percent chance. It's probably the most, of all the hazards that we have, it's probably one of the most likely things that will happen, right? It will flood, but I can't tell you it will flood 2 inches or it will flood 2 feet. I don't know that. But flooding is the most prevalent hazard. So most likely it's going to flood to some degree. I don't know what that is. Yes, sir.
Is there, per se, a flood season similar to how we have the season where hurricanes are more common?
Yeah,
Is there
generally the flood season, the most prone to flood is the spring for us. So you can imagine over the winter, especially if you have a big winter, a lot of snow, the snow's melting somewhere else, right? Maybe not locally, but up
Watershed.
up the watershed, right? So it's melting somewhere else, and it's going to find the ocean at some point, right? And so that water saturates the ground, right? Remember, like when you turn from winter to spring, sometimes it didn't rain, but the ground is like damp or wet. It's kind of soggy. Well, that's kind of like everything melting, all the water runoff getting into there.